Oh la la. Oh.
People like games.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to A Conversation With, and I'm excited to welcome back Joost Van Dreunen, our first ever repeat guest. So thank you for taking the time coming back.
Thanks.
We've been setting up some audio tests and how to sort of manage not talking too loudly. So if we do come across too loudly, blame technology, not us.
There you go.
Joost is the author of One Up, which is still one of the best games or one of the best books on gaming that exists. And one of the best analysis, because you don't really have that version widely done by a lot of authors. And also the author of Super Juice Playlist, which is a weekly Substack newsletter, which is incredible. And if you're a big fan of nonfiction essay writing like I am, then it's your thing. It's worthwhile. Go check it out.
Man. Thanks, man.
Of course. So now, since we last talked, it's been about a year, and so a lot has happened, to say the least. And so I was reading through the book again, and I was trying to be like, can I adapt some of the questions in terms of predictions, etc.? But thought I'd just keep everything more current instead of always looking back. So firstly, what was your favorite video game of the past year that you ended up playing, and why?
Oh, that would have to be Halo. I started the pandemic with Doom Eternal. Because
that's what you were playing last time.
Right. And that one was really just a kind of, I mean, maybe it's full circle now that I think about it. But so Doom Eternal at the beginning of the pandemic was sort of like blowing off steam and getting the frustration out, just shooting things into smaller pieces. It was very satisfying. Halo Infinite, on the other hand, was much more aspirational and sort of like this. It's a shooter game, but it's very calm and like sort of hilarious with the grunts running around. That one I liked, and it was just a real mellow vibe, which it was great to come out of the pandemic. It's sort of like, I have to be hopeful about something, and it seemed to do exactly that for me.
Absolutely. That's actually one of my favorite games as well for gameplay, but it's actually a topic I'm going to come back around to, which is Halo's health since it first launched, because you played the campaign or just the multiplayer campaign primarily?
Both.
And so then moving on to the next sort of one of these intro convo questions, what's the best book you read in the past year?
Ooh, that's a better one. So I mean, you see here, Press Reset by Jason Schreier. That one's pretty good. And I would be remiss to not plug my buddies here, like David Nieborg, who did the Platforms and Cultural Production. So that one is pretty robust in terms of looking at the games industry and how the people that work there and the power relationships that exist between organizations, how that influences and impacts the industry. But I think my favorite one, where is it? Yeah, it's the Platform Delusion. So there's so that one is by Jonathan Nee. He's a professor at Columbia Business School, and he ends up also running the media practice at this bank called Evercore, whatever. I met him one time. He's snarky New Yorker, and he writes about how, all this talk about platforms and platform economics, he's like, it's totally overblown. Those economics don't really exist. Network effects, yeah, kind of, but a lot of them are subsidized. So there is this like idea, this belief in economy and in investing that, the platform is this, holier than holy thing. But in fact, we can ask some really critical questions around that type of thinking. So I like that because he goes against the grain, and, having met the guy, like he's exactly that type of person. So that was my favorite for last year, because it was a sort of to hear the other side. Like we spend so much time talking about this is what Sony should do, or will Amazon make it with its, whatever multi-platform, multi-sided business model. And that's all very cool type of conversation. But what if some of that is just bullshit? What if, let's have that conversation. So I enjoyed that one.
That's a good one. That really reminds me of like a Marshall McLuhan-esque medium as a message study from both angles, because they'll always sell you that the content is the everlasting important, but the actual medium and platform setter. So I'm gonna check that one out. And so then obviously you've been doing a lot of reading. Now I'm gonna start shifting into some of the more gaming questions with What was the biggest thing that happened in gaming, in your opinion, the past year that did not receive the proper amount of media coverage? So like there was a lot of big things that happened, but what's the big thing that flew under the radar? That's like for
Under
me,
the radar.
yeah, for me personally, like I would say like the Apple Epic Games lawsuit consequences and the sort of verdict on that. It felt like there was a lot of anticipation built up as to what could happen. And then I don't really remember anyone really covering in detail that Epic Games lost, and they just sort of walked right past that, right?
That's
it felt like a fun. Right. And so, any versions of those come to mind?
You know, I thought so I'd have to admit that I'm a little bit further down the rabbit hole with the Epic and Apple thing, because you know I come from the data world, and so many of the people I talked to, like they ate it up, like all those slides of P&L statements that came out of that lawsuit was amazing. So it sort of I say removed the veil for so many questions, and like what does Fortnite make exactly kind of stuff. So I think a lot of people ran with it. I thought that could have received more mainstream attention, but certainly that was in the people I talked to, that was a big thing on their mind. So I'd agree with you on that could have been a lot. Nick, it could have been metered out much more broadly than it was. I guess the answer to that question from my end is, you know, I always feel like it's, I mean, one of the things, and it has very little to do with business, except for the fact that the games industry is now so large that it's no longer able to have no opinion about stuff, right? And so I feel that at the beginning of the pandemic, or at the early stages of the Hong Kong protests, you had Activision-Blizzard make this horrible mistake of shutting down a live stream of someone supporting the protests in Hong Kong, and taking all of its winnings away from this Hearthstone tournament. And really kind of coming to the realization that, like, unlike the music industry and unlike the film industry, who, you know, each in their own way have this very pronounced agenda. Like, you know what Hollywood is about, you know what the music industry stands for and where their beliefs are. It's the voice of those people that can't speak for themselves, kind of, they try to both commercialize it, but also be a facilitator of that conversation and that dialogue. The games industry is now this mainstream form of entertainment, you know, bigger than all of it, and they really should take a stance. And they etch it in the buildings. They say everyone counts or every voice matters, but they don't live it. And I think that that's a big thing that kind of flies under the radar. And that now that it's as big as it is, it really has the responsibility and the obligation, I believe, to kind of stand for something. And nobody's home. And I think that that's a real lack of leadership. I think that that's probably because no one wants to upset the delicate balance that is whatever the financial market and dealing with the Chinese government or any of these things in between. But really, they should have a much more focused, extensive, and explicit stance in some of these things.
Well, that's actually a good place for us to start, because one of the things I want to do is sort of go through some of the console questions, like one per, and then starting with obviously Xbox, but say, you know, Activision-Blizzard had a lot of heat leading up. Obviously, they had the major lawsuit filed against them by California with the workplace harassment issues. All of that building up was supposed to be Bobby Kotick gets kicked out, and they sort of refresh Activision-Blizzard with the better work environment, new leadership, right? That's sort of what everyone is pushing for, alongside the sort of unionization push. That's the responsibility that people are looking for. Then all of a sudden, Microsoft swoops in and buys them, right? It doesn't that sort of, because Microsoft was such a beloved, Game Pass is so good for gamers, everything, the narrative, it swoops that out, right? No one's going to take responsibility there anymore, right? Into that degree. So do you think now some of the consolidation and all these musical chairs might make it more difficult for some of the versions of responsibility or outspokenness, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's sort of like it gets all covered up in the moving of addresses and, like, you know. Yeah,
he's going to get a golden parachute and leave, and then Activision Blizzard will be brought into Microsoft, and they'll say, well, it's better now, but the actual foundational aspects that are sort of broken in the culture of the company and some of the practices in gaming industry development, etc., aren't ever going to get touched upon, because we're just going, the next person get bought up before. Bungie's getting heat, they get bought. You know, everyone who's getting heat gets bought. And then you're sort of like,
I hear you. And I think it's a valid point. Like, so are they?
There's a curiosity of how that could be addressed, even.
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, let me answer it in two parts, right? So the first part would be that I agree with you that from the outside, it looks very much like, you know, the whatever people that are either actively contributing to that type of work environment or are actively ignoring it and therefore sort of condoning it in a sense, they are getting bought out and sent off some golden yacht. And that's wrong. Like, that shouldn't be the case. There should be some repercussions. There should be some, and, you know, while it's probably not more than a consolation prize, that, you know, Bobby Kotick, of course, has been running this company for decades, and off he goes. Like, and then you have to ask yourself, like, this acquisition would have happened without all that turmoil? Probably not, or maybe not as quickly, maybe not at this amount. I don't know. Maybe he would have stayed for more. So, you know, what's the difference between 400 million and 500 million as a golden parachute? If that's what he gets out of it, I don't know. But it's the, you know, it's not the crescendo and sort of, you know, high point at the end of his career that he probably would have wanted. So that's not enough punishment, if you could speak of it in those terms, but I can understand how that creates sort of a sense of like, oh, those people aren't being held fully accountable for contributing to this type of horrible practices, right? So I agree with that. I think that in the context of Microsoft, however, Microsoft is a much, much, much larger firm. And because of that, it has been scrutinized and put through the ringer many times over. And so the company culture at Microsoft is very, very different. And so the practices that existed at Activision, I don't think that they can carry over and exist in the context of Microsoft, not at least as I know the company. And I say that for, you know, I've worked with them at Superdata for years, and they're really, really strict. Like, it's one of those companies that as you become a vendor, a service vendor to a company like this, every single person that interacts with Microsoft employees has to like admit, or I say commit to all these things. Like, you have to do a full-on test basically to show that you're not going to do any bribing, that everything's above the sheets, that there's no you know, preferential treatment in any way. So they're very, very, very aware of anything that could throw off their work culture, or could be perceived down the line as like giving a contract to one company, not another one. And you have to kind of play along with that. So I feel that the integration of Activision-Blizzard into the Microsoft empire is going to clean up a lot of that, because it just cannot possibly live. Like, once their HR department takes a broom to this thing, there's going to be a whole bunch of changes because of it. It's just, you know, because Microsoft is that much bigger, like, you don't get to be that big without having your shit together. But it's simple.
Yeah, 100%.
So that's one.
Yeah, so it'll integrate it and then take out and brush out the bad pieces while integrating into the healthier environment.
Well, you know, hopefully,
ideally.
And that's the second piece. When you ask, like, how is that going to go? It's like, well, I know a lot of people that moved from Microsoft and Xbox to Activision in recent years, and of course they're coming back in. But the best example, I think, is Mike Ibarra, right, who is head of Blizzard. You know, he's as I know him and the people around him describe him, he's a straight shooter. So, you know, these are the people that I believe are going to have significant impact into how that's going to go, and how that process is going to go, that transition and that cultural shift is going to take place. And, you know, if Activision and Microsoft, say, culturally speak different languages, you know, he would be one of the translators. So that's how I think it's going to go. That's the how. Will it be a perfect process? No, but, you know, these are corporations with tens of thousands of people. So there's going to be a lot of, you know, if you chop wood, you get splinters. That's inevitable. But
100%.
Overall, will it be an improvement of the circumstance that we've seen in Activision over the last year and a half? Absolutely.
100%. So then, you know, sort of pivoting on that now, but sort of staying on to the acquisition, what strategic purpose did Microsoft have to buy? I know that a little bit of the metaverse question has come in, and the content. Do you think, or I guess the more specific question would be, was it an actual bulwark move against Sony and PlayStation to say, hey, we have to get this before you do? Or do you think it was against Google? Because I know Stadia just bowed out, But if Google had bought them, Stadia is a better technology than xCloud, even though I love xCloud, but it doesn't have the content library. Had they taken Activision-Blizzard, say, I didn't even know if it, who was Xbox competing against, right? Because Xbox lost to Google once. People forget Microsoft is competing with Google, which is what Phil Spencer said a couple of months ago, and Amazon. Had Amazon or Google bought it, well, then they'd automatically become legit players in the game. How come they didn't buy it? And do you think Microsoft was competing against them or Sony in buying it, or just concerned with themselves?
That's an excellent question. So the easy one of the two is the reason Amazon and Google didn't buy an Activision or anything 1/10 the size is because they don't have the results that justify that kind of expense. Stadia is right? I mean, I like the service. I think up until recently, I would say it was superior to xCloud. Lately, my xCloud experience has improved. So I have no, just to be clear, like I have no stake in Xbox's success. Like, if it sucks, I'll tell you that too. But for a while, it did suck compared to Stadia. Stadia was absolutely better. But in my mind, they've caught up in terms of technology, like the latency and the experience I have here in Brooklyn as an individual is like, it's just better for me now than it was 6 months ago. So Stadia doesn't really have that advantage anymore. And I think that they keep pushing like these library updates, and it's like, this is such mediocre stuff. Like I get it, like there's a lot of creative people that work very hard, but this is not the logic that you would have with any kind of platform where you have some cool exclusive, some really interesting titles that are going to make you excited to want to sign up for this stuff. You see it in streaming video. And this is where I have to disclose. So I'm an advisor to a company called Antenna. They track subscriptions for these kind of services like Disney Plus. But one of the drivers there is like, look, when Game of Thrones has a new season, everybody signs up for HBO. When there's a new Stranger Things, everybody renews their Netflix subscription. And then once that's done, they leave again. And so I don't think that either Google or Amazon with Luna really saw the influx of new customers and subscribers that would justify really going all out on a big check. So that's the easier one as to why they didn't buy Activision. And then with regards to like, is it, Microsoft competing with Sony here? I think what they realized after 3 generations that really, Sony's got them beat, in terms of the strict conventional console space. You could go back and forth a little bit about the titles. Of course, Sony's got a really cool library with unique IP, but Sony also has, an extensive sales network, right? They sell TVs and radios and headphones all day long. So they have representatives all over the world in a way that just Microsoft doesn't, because Microsoft is a software business. They don't have the same kind of sales force behind selling the console as Sony, and they never will, right? And so for them to be competitive in that space, they have to sort of redefine the boundaries of what gaming means to them. And that's exactly what they did. And that's exactly what xCloud is all about. And that's exactly why having AAA IP available in your cloud service is going to not just allow them to get out from under Sony in a sense, but it will also allow them to penetrate markets that they've been out of reach, over the years. And they haven't been able to get there because they need to get their devices there. Like, it's been very hard to get consoles into China for years. And so while you would think that would be a great competitive market where you can kind of get in ahead of Sony's, like, that never really worked. So they're redefining their strategy by sort of taking a much broader definition of gaming. And then all of a sudden you need just killer IP and a solid, hardworking service that actually gives you the experience you expect. So I think that's the approach. And so, yeah, they're not doing this to compete with Sony. They're doing this to broaden the understanding of the games industry to the point where Sony is just one piece of that ecosystem, but not the only other competitor in the space. Does that make sense?
See, it does 100%, because actually that brings in the secondary question, which is, like you said, I feel like subscription services were sort of the obvious go-to for quite a while now when it came to gaming, right? So it was just naturally moving towards there, especially as digitalization kicked in. And so Microsoft expanding the base of what is a gamer is basically the Satoru Iwata Wii strategy, right? All right, we've ingrown console gamers too much like PlayStation. We don't have an advantage. So let's expand what the definition is and where you can play. And then you'll be able to depend on subscription services because consoles don't really make a lot of money. They make more money on the games and the peripherals, which now Xbox offers a whole bunch of peripherals, right?
Yes.
Now Sony is trying to compete with this, right? So they've been ahead, but now in this new marketplace, Xbox has laid the groundwork over years for a more scaled strategy to reach new people that have come into gaming. PlayStation, I heard you saying in the podcast on monetizing media, is relaunching their Game Pass service, right? Mm-hmm. Can they compete with Xbox on the same level? Because even if they offer the same service, they don't have the cloud capabilities or the cloud technology. So even if you're saying, hey, I can do it too, mm-hmm. Xbox is like, hey, you can play Halo on your phone, on your computer, literally anywhere, genuinely with the controller. PlayStation doesn't offer that. So if they say we do the same, does that really close the gap, or is PlayStation still, did that Activision-Blizzard push on top of the Bethesda buy sort of really push Xbox in front for at least a generation?
Right. It's a good way to look at it, I think. It's so Sony can't follow Microsoft in infrastructure and cloud technology. They just can't. They just don't build that. They build consumer-facing technology. They're a consumer electronics firm. So they are naturally forced to, and they did strike a deal with Microsoft in North America and with Tencent in Asia to facilitate their backend, because they don't do that. I mean, I'm sure they have some servers somewhere, but never on the same level as Microsoft or Google.
Why don't they just buy NVIDIA GeForce? Like, why don't they just partner with NVIDIA GeForce? Like, I'm going to cut this back because I've been doing cloud gaming forever. You were you were an advisor to Parsec. I knew about Parsec since like 2015 when they first launched because of the ability to play it like that. How come they didn't just look at that? Like, I'm like befuddled. Tell me, why don't they just look at GeForce and say, you have the tech, but you don't have the content? When you tried to go live with the library, everybody left you, but we like you still, we'll do it with you.
It's true. It's true. Like you think that it would be so much easier, right? Like, or so much more obvious. So I think the honest answer is that the corporations don't always do the obvious thing. And I think that they've, not necessarily made some mistakes, but, as they move forward, they have to think about the entire company as they do it, right? And so Sony does not have a huge ability to, again, look at the world that way. They don't have that luxury. They were also at the time, if you remember, transitioning CEOs. Mm-hmm. And of course, now there's a whole new wind, and we're going to build things from the ground up, and we're going to tinker again, and we're going to, turn the lab back on and figure out how that's going to go. So they were going through a huge cultural shift in that sense anyways. And I think they really look at like 10 to 20 year timelines rather than, can we spend a few $100 million and plug this hole in the market, right? I think that they really think of it on an infrastructural issue. And as a consumer electronics company, their biggest hits were always in coming up with a device that no one else had. Like the PlayStation 5, you still can't get it. I'm sure you have one, right? But I'm still looking around like a peasant trying to figure out, like, come on, can I get one? And it's because it's so good that demand just far exceeds supply. Also because of sort of these economic trends and like shortage in supply and chipsets shortages, whatever. But it comes down to, that's their strength, and they're going to stick to that, right? They're trying to basically figure out, like, how can we build a new Walkman in this, like, in the 21st century here? And they have no interest in, therefore, to really beef up their backend, because it doesn't make sense for them. Like, that's not what they're good at. So they won't pursue that, I think.
That makes sense. And then, so that actually makes sense. So if you're not going to pursue a strategy that might be common sense on its face, but maybe not what is in your company DNA, like say consumer products or stuff, that actually now brings me to Nintendo, because Nintendo obviously is Nintendo, right? They have no issue, no concern with anything going on.
Nintendo does
by industry standards. They don't care. They're like, no, we're doing this. We're making a Mario movie. Like, okay, real nice Steam Deck you have there. Does it play Pokemon? No, go buy our game. And so, but one place they've very actively avoided since early failures is the mobile market. And so I was going to ask you, why now as Nintendo Switch gets bigger and they have that partnership with Niantic, but Niantic hasn't recreated its success since Pokemon Go. The new Pikmin game doesn't make sense. There's a limited type of life that exists for Nintendo mobile games. Why are they so bad at that? And do you, like PlayStation, have a confidence that they're not going to pursue it because it's opposed to their sort of core competency?
Nintendo is a toy company, simply put, right? So they look for interesting, unique, can't live without kind of experiences that no one else is doing. So they're not. I mean, the GameCube. What was it? Forget what it was. The Nintendo 64 was basically 2 units of its predecessor. I think the GameCube was 2. I forget the chronology here for a second. But so they've never emphasized technology as the main driver of their success. Whereas, of course, Sony only does that, right? It's always about the chips. Apple only does that. Consumer electronic firms like Samsung, that's all they do all day. Better graphics, cooler buttons on the side of your device, whatever. Nintendo is like, look, we're making craziness. We're making a Switch, and you're not going to understand quite what it is, but the controllers come off, and that allows you to do multiplayer, and then you could also have this cradle. And so, who thinks of that? Like Sony would never in a million years come up with something, not even close. Never mind Microsoft, of course. Like Microsoft is not a huge innovator when it comes to devices and hardware like that. So Nintendo is really very differently organized in that in order to afford itself to do things like that, they have to be totally, they have to be relentless about ignoring what people tell them to do at their time. And so that's how they operate. They are actively not caring about anything anyone has to say, because that has never served them at all in the past. And so they're convinced of that. And I think they're right. I think they're going to continue making these magical things. The Switch just sold more units than the Wii.
Yeah.
It's just, no one saw that coming. Like they all thought that the Nintendo was dead when the Wii U cratered and performed very poorly. They sold 13.4 million units, and that was it. After the Wii, which had 10 times that. And so then they thought the Switch, we'll see, and here we are. So, the easy way to phrase it is always they don't count Nintendo out. You always think that they're sort of slacking or they're not doing it right. But they're on their own different track here. They cannot be measured by the same success. Huh?
Well, they can't be measured by the same success measurements because they are working on a different sort of axis, right? So all 3 of the companies that competed on this plane sort of shifted. So it's like in Xbox, they're just like, hey, we're cloud and we'll get you as many games as you want wherever you want. That's their selling point.
Games for everyone, right?
Everywhere, anywhere. PlayStation's like, if you're a gamer, in the sense, come to us for that high-end experience. Oh, and our IP is so high-end that Hollywood wants to make high-end TV shows and movies about it. And like you said, if people go to Stranger Things and then go get Netflix, would they watch Last of Us and then go buy a PlayStation? Arguably, think so, right? And so now you have them on the back end trying to do a similar thing. Basically, the point would be at what version are these 3 sort of competing then moving forward? If they're trying to, PlayStation, it's not really a diagonal competition. They're each in their own lane. So can we just look at them all as 3 things instead of saying the console wars? It's it's no longer the console wars.
It's no, and I don't think it ever was, because Nintendo took a left turn and said, Microsoft and Sony, they can have each other and compete over bits and bytes and graphics and try to get that adult market. We're trying to make fun things like Mario Kart and Zelda here, and that's all we do all day long. And I think that was the right choice. Sony, because it's in some ways it's incredibly predictable. So Sony, of course, buys game studios like Guerrilla Games and Bungie because it needs cool IP. Why does it need cool IP? Because it sells the PlayStation, yes, but also giant televisions and $400 headphones. And so, they also have a they're one of the three largest music labels in the world. They also are incredible movie producing entity. So for them, content is a necessary complementary asset, or a thing. Like it's the popcorn to their movie theater kind of thing, right? It's like that's why they're in the game, and so they're going to continue to follow that same strategy because it helps them sell the hardware. It helps them push devices into people's homes. It's why you pay $400 for headphones, because you want to have that real musical experience, that audio experience. The PSVR is trying to be the same thing, I think, but it's sort of like visual. So you see with Sony, it's a little bit like how Activision used to do it with its 3 different studios for Call of Duty, but they cycle between every year. Is a different division gets to sort of have the stage. And so the PlayStation VR was sort of like the visual people, like the visual engineering. And then, you have audio will take the foreground, and then the devices.
Haptic feedback controller people were there with the PlayStation.
Exactly. 5. So everybody gets a turn, right? And so every engineering group gets like a year to shine. And then they reset that in some way. I think that's a much more predictable way to be. And then Microsoft is really a software company, right? So they look at everything. It's like, okay, how can we create an account? And their version sort of, you hear Satya Nadella talk about the metaverse. It's basically you're going to use your gamer tag to, like, of course, log into Game Pass, but also how you go and then get your whatever account through your college Excel version or whatever, and you use Microsoft Teams, God help you. But you're going to have one consistent identity through all of those applications. That's their version of what the world looks like. And they're not selling headphones. Are you kidding?
No,
they try to
experience, which is like just give you all the different softwares you need in one single place, and then gaming and professional. So, all right. So now I got like 2-3 more questions, and then I'll let you run, because I know you're busy and it's Friday afternoon. So I don't want to just like be like, hey, guess what your Friday afternoon is? Talking to me.
I appreciate it.
NFTs in gaming, which is a big one.
Boy.
Why do gamers and why does the industry feel like that about them? Because for all intents and purposes, they are big proponents of exclusivity and skins and digital items and not having what's in the shop. Why then is NFTs? Is it the people who sell NFTs the way they do on Twitter that make people not like NFTs versus the actual fundamental aspect of them?
I mean, you
have that objective.
I think it's like a 20-80 distribution. I think 20% is people in the games industry, both the consumers and creatives, that have a particular culture around commercialization and profit and the conversation of money. And it's always been fascinating to me. Like, you're not supposed to talk about money in the games industry because everything is supposed to be fun. Like, especially indie developers, they love talking about like, oh, my game is going to be good enough on its own and it will sell, and I don't do marketing, and people in suits are scary, blah, blah, blah. Right. So it's sort of a taboo to talk about the commercialization of content for a lot of the people out there that make games, and a lot of people that enjoy games, that play games. And I think that is naive in some ways, because, you got to eat if you want to build something, right? And you have lights on if you want to play something. So things cost money.
Patreon's the same thing.
Exactly. So there's different ways to deal with the money question. I think 80% of it, on the other hand, is that all these blockchain, crypto bros running their mouth. The easiest thing to say is that it's really about the financialization of everything, that they really just get into this and pretend that there is some value here. But in fact, of course, it's a crude version of a Ponzi scheme where it only makes sense for the people in the system when they can successfully recruit new people to join and also buy an NFT, because it raises the value of whatever they're already holding. So there's part of that, but they also cloak themselves in this idea of, oh, it's actually fun and it's games and we're doing this cool thing with community. And if the premise is that you're going to make money in like play to earn, or if the premise is like I'm holding an NFT or a collection of NFTs because I want to sell them and that's my asset that appreciates over time, are you really in it for the fun of it? Are you really collecting things that are aesthetically pleasing, or is that really an experience, or is it just I'm trying to sell this to the next sucker? And I think that is currently where a lot of that industry is at. I think that they are really just sort of money hungry, and they haven't really thought through how to build a sustainable business over the long term. So for that reason, I think it's obvious, like the knee-jerk reaction, while the games industry and game consumers tend to be very anti-money, I think in this case has been correct.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not, like you said, it's not well thought out, and it's getting sort of pushed in. But it actually brings me to my next question, because it brings me into esports, because FaZe was going public, and a large amount of their valuation was tied to what their future earnings would be through the NFTs and the metaverse. That is, again, buzzwords, and a lot of buzzwords are existing in the space. Do you think, even in the form it is, that I know you wrote about this, but is there a justifiable version for that sort of valuation for FaZe or any other esports teams, leagues? Or do you think that is like maybe NFTs, not a Ponzi scheme, but a sort of hopeful valuation that they hope people will agree with, and that will sort of set the standard?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if I recall correctly, it's they had like this sort of tiered graph on how they're going to make money, and
in 5-6 years.
Right, in 5-6 years, they were going to be worth 650 million in revenues or something.
Yeah,
up from like 30 or 50 million today.
Like 13, that's 100% jump. Yeah,
huge increase. But so 100 million or so of that would come from NFTs in the metaverse. Okay, I think that is probably sort of buzzword bingo, where in order to get the attention of investors and kind of make the case, you have to kind of say the thing, and you're either provoking some sense of FOMO, or perhaps it's you're trying to sound like you know what you're talking about, and you have some vision, and people go like, oh, this person has a vision, it's like, we should invest. They're selling something to people at some point, of course, but I think that's probably a very rudimentary version of it. Over time will become a more complex experience, and I think that's where FaZe has some potential. It's the redefinition of how we interact with content. It's no longer just playing the game. It's watching the game. It's buying a cool skin for your character. It's attending an event, going to some big stadium and hanging out with your buddies. Seeing some concert that's associated with, like, watching the show on Netflix, right? I thought so the way that we can interact with media franchises today, particularly the ones that have a strong basis in the games industry, I think that is what's different now. Like, you can't do that with Mickey Mouse. Like, you can go watch Mickey Mouse in the movies and in cartoons, and you can go to Disneyland, but so that's a more conventional model. Like, you can't play Mickey Mouse. There's no Mickey Mouse video games, not really.
Are they more or less just music labels then? Most esports teams
that's the question, right? Right. I think the music industry offers some really good parallels that will help us understand sort of the direction of the games industry. One would be that we've never really had celebrity in the games business. You had, of course, the fact that you had these narratives around some individual, like a Will Wright, who would make The Sims. It's like, oh, well, he's such a brilliant designer. Yeah, that's a marketing ploy. They just make it seem like he did all the work alone, and that it was his one vision. So of course, there's other people involved, but fine, that sells better. It makes it easier to market it. But celebrity culture, like red carpet events, didn't exist in the games industry up until a few years ago. And esports was really the first to do it, right? Where you have the esports awards, and it's like a black tux event in Vegas, and everybody looks like they're used to be in the mafia or something. It's like this really culturally different direction that the games industry went into. And I think that's probably an interim stage. I think over time it will kind of ease up, and it will probably become more like the VMAs, or like a little cooler, a little bit more casual, a little like edgier, more people with whatever facial piercings or whatever, because celebrity culture that didn't exist. Like, the old guard of game developers and game designers are just huge programming nerds with cargo pants and bad hair, and they have no sense of celebrity because it didn't exist in the industry at the time. That's changing, and then it will follow more along the lines of music than anything else.
Yeah, Absolutely. And then it's funny, the parallels between music and film, because then the creative directors of the studios are then more akin to Hollywood directors. But all these esports orgs and lifestyle brands are just music labels who manage talent, et cetera. But then just the last part, because you mentioned the sort of like the naturalizing of the gaming culture in the future versus right now they're sort of mimicking stuff. It's all sort of new. So it's like, hey, it's black tie. And it's like, we don't really work like that. Why are we doing that? Esports leagues in particular are another one, like Call of Duty League, et cetera, that mimicked or used the models from traditional sports leagues. Do you see them sort of succeeding moving forward in those models, or do you think they too will have to adapt? I think Counter-Strike is the best model of what professional esports should be in terms of how it opens up and teams and tournaments, et cetera. Do you think other places have to manage that, or do you think that there'll still be that sort of traditional format that exists that's analogous, so let's adopt it?
Right. It's so all sports change once they become spectator sports, right? So the football as it existed before became like the NFL. It's a very different sport, and there's like volumes written about how fans of the original version, like sort of leather helmet football, they were outraged once it became popular because all of a sudden, like, you know, salaries increase and the culture around it changes, and they said, well, it's all about the marbles now and not about the game, right? It's all about the winnings and the money and the whatever, the flashy lights. You know, the same, of course, you can expect to happen with the games industry. And so they tried with the league system with Overwatch, which I don't think was very successful, because it basically just sells the same thing to the same people all over again. You just sell it to like other sports people that are already in the business, and they're going to only bring mostly the same ideas to how to evolve this. So it's nothing new. What I would look for is, you know, games that are designed from the ground up to facilitate both playing and watching, right? And so it seems sort of obvious, but basketball was purposely designed to facilitate, you know, these schools where people didn't have a lot of space to do high intensity activity indoors because it was cold outside, right? So basketball had to meet certain demands as a sport to facilitate its players. And so then over time it becomes a spectator sport, and it changes a little bit, of course, but you know, you can imagine a video game being developed purposefully to be a spectator game.
But isn't that a coincidental marriage of form and function? So like basketball as
design, yes.
But it wasn't the design of basketball to become like, why is basketball bigger now than it was 10 years ago? I think it's because 5-second clips of a dunk is better. Baseball 10 years ago in the slow day era, well, okay, that's a lot bigger than now because it doesn't translate. Do you think like that a game can design for that ahead of time for both, or do you think it'll just find an overlap?
Absolutely. So I think, you know, part of what the appeal is of current games like a CSGO or even League of Legends or Dota in particular, is like complexity is part of the appeal. It sort of it presents an entry barrier to casual spectators. Like, you have no idea what's going on, you're not going to stick around because you don't really belong here, right? And I think that that's purposeful because it still kind of keeps the user base kind of focused and concentrated and committed. Basketball, or, you know, as an immigrant in the US, like basketball to me is infinitely easier to understand than football. I watched yet again, I tried last weekend to watch the Super Bowl. It's just so many minute interruptions. It's unwatchable for me.
Yeah.
Also incomprehensible. I mean, I understand the rules, right? I've done the homework, but it's just not the same spectator experience. So games can fall the same way. But you have to kind of wonder, like, to what extent is it trying to be mainstream and really include anyone and everyone in the same way that the World Cup soccer is something that you see everywhere and everybody gets that? Or are they trying to kind of keep it a little bit exclusive and kind of focus the audience and really just pick up the top fans and the biggest spenders in that ecosystem? And I don't think we're there yet where you could see a basketball or soccer equivalent in gaming, because it's not in their interest of design. It's not in the interest of the publishers to do it that way.
Well, you do in Wordle. You get the simplicity
Yes,
of adoption
Wordle
of things
esports.
get big.
Sign me right up.
The popularity. It's like what's similar about basketball and soccer? You need one ball. The baseline requirements are 0. I need two. You can make it up with a singular ball. I think, as you said, with football, the equipment, the rules, the jargon. Any game like Rocket League will probably have a forever lifespan because it's just mythical. Each time will be different, sort of like a infinite loop of something new each time. But like you said, that's a business strategy versus.
Then the business needs they start to inform the creative agenda, right? It's StarCraft 2, great game, brilliant game. 600 actions per minute to compete. That's nuts, right? And so clearly, the design something like that would benefit from better design, right? That's an early stage and it needs to evolve. And so 10 years from now, we'll look back and say, CSGO, yeah, that was like StarCraft 2 before that. It's just iterations, and they will tweak it over time to better suit gameplay, accessibility, and spectatorship.
Well, that's about all the questions I had to bug you with for the day. Thank you again, as always, for taking the time.
Always a pleasure. I enjoy the conversations.
Of course. I look forward to hopefully having you back again in the future.
Give me a call. We'll talk.
And remember, everybody, Super Juice playlist, that's on Substack. 1UP, the book, on Twitter as Super Juice, and all the things above.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.